the untainted, the twin, the means of checking the reliability of results. This is how the Book of Alternity, at least in one case, describes the inner region, one of the four main components of the multiverse of the Ragnarök Chronicles book series that I've mentioned in previous videos. Now, of those four parts of the multiverse, the inner region is the one that is likely going to come up the least, both in terms of the books and in terms of these videos, by virtue of the fact that it's one that's kind of harder to interact with, so people either don't have the means to, or they don't put in that effort. All the same, however, I want to make sure that it is given the same kind of limelight in terms of these videos, so that's what we'll be discussing today. Hello, and welcome to the Ragnarök Chronicles. My name is Dominic, and this is a channel where I just talk you through some of the elements of the lore of the books that I am writing. Now, I have discussed the multiverse and the inner region in some previous videos, but in case you haven't seen those or you have forgotten, I'll just go over the basics once again. So, the Earth, the version of Earth that we live on, exists within the plane known as the Alpha Realm. Now, this consists of a chain of universes which are almost identical to each other, just with tiny variants each time, and they are all static. Our perception of time comes from our souls passing down the chain from one universe to the next at such a fast rate that it appears to us that we instead have fluid motion. It's like a stop-motion film. We still have free will in this kind of case, because the algorithm in the baseline of reality that determines what the next universes are going to be like does base that upon what we each are most likely to do. But then, as I say, in that kind of case, it is a little blend of free will and things being predetermined. This, however, is not the only part of the multiverse that exists as like a chain of static universes. The inner region is the other one. Or not only is there that general similarity, they also more or less coexist on top of each other. You may know that the majority of an atom is empty space. Well, that's at least how it appears to us. Some of that empty space is actually taken up by yet more atoms, just out of sync with ours and made of a slightly different composition that means we can't detect them here on our side. This is what the inner region is made up of. And it then has its own chain of bubble universes, which are in turn static comparative to one another. There is one thing though, the first universe in the Alpha Realms chain actually lines up with the last one in the inner regions chain, and vice versa. The last universe in the Alpha Realms chain lines up with the first universe in the inner regions chain. So they're going in opposite directions to each other as they more or less coexist, just it's a tiniest fraction out of sync with one another, and so not interacting with one another. So as it then happens, the kind of the frequency or the manner of existence of the Alpha Realm is a lot more accessible to beings from like the outer region or the Beta Realm, those other two parts of the multiverse beyond ours. And so when they come to interact with something here, they are much more likely to interact with the Alpha Realm because it is easier. They're not going to bother or try to get to the inner region. The two realities, before being interfered with, as I'll get into in a second, were identical to each other, as I say, just running in opposite directions. So to begin with, it didn't really matter which they went to, so yeah, might as well just go to the Alpha Realm. But then also, once those external forces started interacting with the Alpha Realm, they would continue interacting with the Alpha Realm because that's where all of their progress had been made in whatever they were doing before. So, right, that level of interference then. From the point of view of Earth specifically, we have had a couple of kinds of interference before that have made massive difference to our planet. The first of which comes from an event from the Beta incursion, which I've mentioned before as being like the first real conflict in this current iteration of the multiverse. As I have also mentioned in the previous videos where I've talked about this, I have mentioned this kind of part of the history that we're going to be talking about. I haven't necessarily fleshed out all the details for yet because the books that we'll be covering these are further down the chain. I haven't planned those out as much, so I'm not going to necessarily have names for all the species or whatever in this case. But I know like the beats of what happens as well, so I'm going to talk about here. The same is going to be true of what I talk about as happening in the inner region as well, because the books that end up exploring these, primarily Journey Through Gemini and Prodigal Crew, at least that's what they're called right now, books 2 and 3 out of 4 in the Moonbase series. Again, just as I refer to it at the moment, although it will show up in other places as well, but they're the main ones we'll be investigating the inner region. They're quite a way down the line, so I haven't thought about those as much for the moment. So we'll just be getting through this without necessarily precise terminology, but I'll still try to convey everything as clearly as possible. But yes, from the beta incursion, you had, again, if you've seen, I think it was Who the Gods Met? Oh, I don't know. If it's not, then it'll be a different video that's linked in the iCard, but whatever. In that video, I talked about how you had the Exodus aliens who went around all the different parts of the Alpha Realm to basically scan every single kind of life form that exists in our iteration of the multiverse. But as part of this, in an attempt to placate the Brethren Lords who were pursuing them at the time for their technology, they tried to help the Brethren Lords who at that time were still trying to develop their Mansins, their emissaries in the Alpha Realm. They worked out how they could cause the evolution of a species that would be the most compatible for the Manson process. Therefore, they found an asteroid, and about 65 million years ago, from our point of view, they sent it crashing into the Earth, which sent off a chain reaction, which would then ultimately lead to the evolution of humanity. Now, what I didn't mention in that previous time was, though, because the Exodus aliens come from a different iteration of the multiverse, they are not used to this idea of Alpha Realm, inner region, that kind of divide and stuff. So they didn't really know what to make of it. Therefore, to be safe, they caused this interaction with the asteroid to happen in both planes of existence. Therefore, not only was humanity caused to evolve in the Alpha Realm, but also now the inner region, which otherwise would have had no humanity as well, now got that chain of evolution spawning similarly. However, as time would then go forward, again in the Alpha Realm you have the Brethren Lords subsequently using humanity via the Mansins to shape the Earth to a point where by the time we get to these first books, Gift of the Manson and so forth, it's near a point where it can be weaponized in their conflict with the entities, which is the finalised name. There's a whole reason why they have such a vague name, again in Who the Gods Met, and no, they call themselves gods, that's what I meant. They call themselves gods and Who the Gods Met. Anyway, those two videos. Why they call themselves that specifically. But yeah, so as the Brethren Lords are basically driving the technological process and the societal progress on the Alpha Realm's Earth, the inner region's Earth didn't get that. So while you still have humanity evolving and developing as a culture, it's without this alien guidance, and therefore it goes in different directions, and also, more importantly, it goes at a slower rate. I'd say that humanity wouldn't be innovative enough to get through those like technological thresholds and boundaries and breakthroughs, but it would take them a little bit longer without the pushing of, say, the likes of the Brethren Lords. Therefore, if you were to look at, say, around, just say 2016, which is when the Gift of the Manson set of 4 books are set, if you were to look at Earth comparatively in the inner region at that equivalent point, again, you'd have to kind of find a 2016 in their end, which is going backwards, you know, because they're crossing timelines. They would still have, obviously, like your towns and your settlements and your shops and whatever, but you may be looking at it being at a state maybe more around the 1800s, maybe that kind of level. So they are still getting there, obviously maybe still different actual designs of the technology, but that kind of level of progress, maybe around there at that point, just for some kind of comparison. And that then is, again, how it would stay for the most part. The inner region still is not getting any kind of outside interference. Therefore, any of the other things from the Brethren Lords or the entities or any of the other races that I'm pretty sure I haven't talked about yet interfering with the Alpha Realm, all that stuff is not happening there. Theirs is a relatively peaceful reality. Obviously, you're still going to have some kind of conflicts going on there in and of themselves in those populated systems, but compared to the scale of the conflict happening in the Alpha Realm, yeah, it's, let's say, relatively peaceful. Then we come to another event, which I'm not actually going to detail because I guess it's kind of spoilery for certain books that are going to come up. So I say specifically, but there will come a point where the baseline reality algorithm that determines the nature of the inner region, just as how one determines the nature of the Alpha Realm, that algorithm gets hijacked, let's say, and it specifically causes the inner region to reshape to once again become a copy of the Alpha Realm. Again, remember they started off identical to each other before the interference. So it recorrects it and makes it identical again. So even though we're still not getting any active interference from the Brethren Lords and whoever, the inner region, as of that point, is now reshaped as if it had had all of that previous progress. So now Earth, their Earth, suddenly shifts to becoming the version of Earth that had previously had all of that progress. So kind of lurching everything forward and making changes here and there, but again it now immediately starts to fall behind again, because again it's still not getting that actual interference afterwards. So it shifts in that way. But because of that, we now have some major changes to the dynamics of those realities. For one thing, we have a creature who I shall leave nameless for the moment, again for spoiler reasons, actively is going around and basically preventing the events that would follow in the Alpha Realm from happening in the inner region as well. Specifically killing off any influential people who, again, are native to the inner region rather than those, again, who would be interfering, so that, again, those events never happen and take place for motivations that, again, once, third time, won't go into. But of course, that leads off a chain reaction of suddenly these people aren't there in these versions of the worlds. You also have, because you had all of the alien interference up until that changing point, rather than going forwards. Now suddenly, if we just focus on Earth, for instance, this version of Earth now suddenly finds itself with access to like all of this alien stuff that otherwise wasn't taken away again, because of, again, all those influential and important people. And as such, not only is the technological level of this version of Earth suddenly jumped ahead because of the change to the algorithm, but also because they can now forward their own progress by studying, again, all of this technology themselves. Yes, in the version of Earth as per the Alpha Realm, we had been getting help from alien technology anyway through the agents of the Brethren Lords, but this is now everyone on Earth, or a lot more of Earth, being able to take advantage of all of this stuff that they now find themselves with without anyone coming back to try to take it away from them. So that's for Earth. But elsewhere, again, as we get further into the future especially, things out in space in general start to get a lot worse. So we've mentioned before, first of all in this video, about the souls that pass between the universes, but also in another video specifically I've talked about how you also have things like the Nelosium, the silent satellites, that help with the souls, first of all being studied, but also then once a person dies, the soul gets uploaded into that kind of satellite network until a new body can be found for it to pass into, and then it carries on through that new life as well. Well, by virtue of the inner region now becoming identical to the Alpha Realm, the silent satellites were also copied over. However, these are now not being monitored and maintained by the Brethren Lords in the towers, who again are just focusing on the ones in the Alpha Realm. Therefore, these satellites over time start to degrade and malfunction, and that also means they have a detrimental effect on the souls that are passing through them as well, to the point where eventually these souls start to misform, mutate, creating what we could compare to eldritch abominations, the likes of the things you have in the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft out in space. Now, per the nature of those kind of cosmic horror creatures, we can't really go into descriptive detail as to what these are, because the whole point is that they are too unimaginable, they are too vast and horrific and godlike, like the terrible gods, for our mere human minds to comprehend either exactly what they are, or what their motives are, how they think in turn, any of that. We can just feel their effects in some out-of-context manner. But in playing around with these, this is kind of an opportunity where basically I wanted to have a reason to include Eldritch Abomination somewhere in the Mythos. Because of these are out there and could potentially be interacted with, this is an opportunity to try to be creative and see what I can come up with in that regard. The one I will just talk about today, again I won't go into too much detail about because it is still in the planning process, but one of the main things about it is the way in which it can kind of obscure itself to make itself harder to be studied by those lower beings is by it's able to basically surround itself in black holes. Not necessarily creating them, or maybe it can do that as well, but it's like moving through space, existing black holes, to basically create a shell around of itself, wherein anything from the outside, all light, basically just gets sucked into the event horizon as you'd expect, and no one can get past, but it, in its greater strength and kind of existing in a slightly different manner because it's more of a mutation of the soul energy, it is immune to the effects. So it can kind of sit in its little bubble, having more like potentially psychic effects out to other parts of the universe, while no one can then either see it or reach it itself. Then also, speaking of black holes, again on perhaps a slightly more traditional level in terms of the baddies and empires that you can expect from science fiction, you have the rise of this other kind of, let's say, empire or leader of some kind, again, whose name I don't have right now because it's in the planning phase, who is building a lot of their energy or power that allows them to do all this kind of conquest through a massed project of stellarification. Now, if we think of the likes of Jupiter, the large gas giants, they in theory could have had the potential to turn into stars themselves. They're big enough for that, Jupiter especially. However, it was just the fact that they didn't have enough mass, they weren't dense enough for all of the different particles to end up fusing together. But if, say, you were to seed a black hole into Jupiter, while initially it would be sucking in some of the matter, eventually the radiation being given out by the black hole would kind of balance this out a little, and either way, before long, what you end up with is this greater density inside of Jupiter, to the point where now, again, all of those particles do start fusing together, and it does become a sun. Now, you could potentially use this to, like, if you wanted to try to terraform some of Jupiter's moons, if they're far enough away, like you've now given them a much closer source of sunlight, or you could use it again just for some kind of solar energy. But specifically in this case, again, this villain, who, whatever their name ends up being, is for their own source of power generation, taking lots of gas giants from across space, and from the Alpha Realm as well, which I'll just clarify in a second, bringing them all together into one localized point in space to basically turn them all into like hot Jupiters, you could call them. I believe that's the same thing. If not hot Jupiter, something else that you should look into these stellarified bodies, so that we can get lots of solar energy, lots of nuclear power to then go on and fuel other things. Just what I was saying about the Alpha Realm, the reason why this particular empire rose in this version of the timeline, in this version of the inner region, as opposed to in the Alpha Realm, because still I guess they have that potential for it to happen, is that someone who, once more, will go unnamed. I realise this will unnamed for spoiler reasons, to clarify. I realise there's a lot of lack of naming in this because either stopping for spoilers or stopping because I just haven't come up with the word yet. You know, this is what's good about this, right? You are kind of getting to see me in the developmental process, right? So you can see where I'm at this stage in 2020, and years down the line when these books come out, if you wanted to compare, you can see how things have changed since then, whatever. But also, another thing is, I'm aware that in some previous videos where I have done a lot of that prepping and planning already, and thus included a lot of terminology when I was talking about that stuff, I'm aware that that may have come across as a little bit much. So this is kind of the counterbalance to that, where we don't have any terminology really at all. But yes, the point is, in the future, someone or some people in the Alpha Realm will be specifically actually feeding some gas giants through to the inner region, specifically so that they can get rid of one of them. But as part of the whole process, they're getting rid of others, both to mask which one they're actually specifically needing to get rid of for their own plan, but also to encourage that enemy on the other side to keep on accepting these gas giants, so forth. So that's happening there. Yeah. So in that way, while it's, again, not necessarily connecting to any of the stuff that's going on in the Alpha Realms adventures, which tie into the outer region and so forth, the inner region is still ending up with its own set of problems that the people there are having to deal with as well. There, again, are going to be other, like, Eldritch Abominations as well, which are, again, kind of an excuse for me to, you know, make use of some other off-the-wall ideas that I may have for things, so like these other beings that will just mess with the peoples of certain planets, while also as part of that having the capacity to wipe them out if that so ends up being their whim, but kind of meddlesome creatures that are doing things for some motivation, again, beyond really our comprehension. But beyond that, I think that's just stuff that will be left to be explained. The inner region is an important playing card in certain parts of the grander multiversal conflict, but it is one that, for a lot of the time, will end up being left untouched. Hopefully you found some of that interesting. Next week we'll be finally doing the making a Stargate sequel that I've been basically talking up since I did the first of the making a sequel videos, because it's that time of the month again. It's been 4 weeks, and then beyond that once more we'll then return. The cycle continues back with Ragnarök Chronicles and so forth. So either way, stick around for that. Check out some other videos on a channel as well if you like. Again, if you found this interesting. And either way, until I see you again, just remember to keep on telling stories.